Long before the word civilization existed, there were rivers that rose and fell without warning, clay that cracked under a sun harsher than ours, and the first human settlements clinging to the edges of what would one day be called southern Mesopotamia. Archaeologists digging through the dust of Uruk found not myths carved with reverence, but tablets tossed away like broken tools, lists of grain, tallies of livestock, offerings assigned to gods whose roles were already fixed. These fragments, dated to around 3100 BCE, carry no sign of hesitation, no trace of a belief system learning to walk. Instead, they reveal something that should not exist: a world of divine councils, cosmic jurisdiction, and moral order already complete in the very first writing humanity ever pressed into clay. The chronology feels wrong, as if an entire prelude of spiritual evolution simply never happened. From the Ubaid culture that came before, villages without temples large enough to house such theology, to the abrupt emergence of monumental cities, the record holds a silence that modern scholars cannot fill. Why does law appear fully formed? Why do kings describe authority as something descending rather than rising? Why do the earliest myths speak not of creation, but of assignment, roles given, boundaries drawn, destinies fixed? And why does the name used for the beings who administered this order echo across millennia even after their stories fade? The Anunnaki. Something is missing. Not a relic, but a step in human thinking. A leap no one can trace. Was it a forgotten disaster that erased earlier traditions? A political reshaping by later empires? Or did the first cities inherit a framework older than themselves, one not written by human hands, but preserved in structure, in practice, in memory? Welcome to the Cryptic Realm channel. Let us move forward, quietly, into the unanswered. What if the beliefs we think we created were never ours to begin with? What if the logic we still obey was shaped long before we were able to question it? Word count 296. The clay fragments from Uruk linger like a riddle no one remembers asking. They lie in museum drawers, their wedge-shaped impressions softened by time. Yet the moment one begins to read them, a strange tension emerges. The earliest tablets do not sound like the dawn of belief. They read like the continuation of something older, as though the scribes were documenting rules already understood rather than discovering them. Grain allocations to deities are listed with the same confidence as rations for temple workers. Oaths reference divine witnesses without explanation, as if the scribes assumed the reader knew exactly who watched from beyond the visible world. It is this quiet certainty, this absence of theological experimentation, that unsettles historians most. One would expect hesitation, trial and error, the gradual shaping of gods from storm or river or mountain. Instead, there is order, dense, procedural, unwavering. The land these tablets came from was unforgiving. Southern Mesopotamia, with its shifting rivers and fragile irrigation networks, forced its people into cooperation long before they had the language to describe obligation. Sediment from ancient floods shows how entire villages could vanish in days, leaving behind nothing but layers of silt. A reminder that survival depended on coordination, and coordination depended on something that bound strangers together. Yet the belief systems that should have emerged slowly under this pressure appear in the record all at once, fully formed, as if the idea of cosmic administration had preceded the societies that needed it. The temples of Uruk, especially the great Ienna precinct dedicated to Inanna, already operated like bureaucratic machines during their earliest phases. Workers were paid in barley beer and bread, priests recorded celestial events with precision suggesting long-standing tradition, and kings swore loyalty before gods whose jurisdictions were clearly delineated. The question that seeps through this archaeological landscape is simple but deeply unsettling. How did the first cities know how to think like cities? Some scholars argue that earlier ritual systems existed but left no trace because they were oral, ephemeral, or destroyed by floods. Others suggest that the abrupt appearance of writing created the illusion of sudden complexity, that the foundations of Sumerian theology were older than the clay on which they were recorded. But even these interpretations do not fully explain the coherence found in the earliest records. When the Sumerian king list declares that kingship descended from heaven, it does not elaborate, as if the notion required no justification. The verb chosen is precise, indicating transfer, not invention. And when the list recites the reigns of antediluvian rulers, tens of thousands of years long, it does so using the same numerical conventions applied to grain taxes and temple accounts. This is not mythology in the loose, evolving sense known from later cultures. It is chronology written with the certainty of memory. The silence before Uruk becomes even more pronounced when one examines earlier sites like Eridu, often considered the world's first city. Excavations reveal a sequence of temples built atop one another for over 1,000 years, each slightly larger than the last. But nowhere in these layers is there a clear predecessor to the sophisticated divine hierarchy that appears fully articulated in later texts. The physical structures grew generation by generation, while the theology appears abruptly, as if inserted into the architectural rhythm rather than emerging from it. The dissonance lingers. The temples evolved like buildings, but the gods within them arrived like administrators moving into offices already prepared. It is tempting to frame this as a gap in the archaeological record, a missing chapter that time has hidden. Yet the consistency of the later system raises another possibility, more subtle, more difficult to articulate. What if the people of the first cities did not believe they were creating religion at all? What if they believed they were documenting a structure that preceded them, something woven into the world itself? The hymns, even as their fragmentary state, hint at this sense of inheritance. The Anunnaki are described not as beings born into the cosmos, but as those who determine destinies, a phrase implying judgment rather than origin. Their authority is not explained, it is assumed. And when myths speak of divine councils assigning roles, they describe processes that mirror the administrative realities of city life, as though cosmic order and human governance were two reflections of the same unseen architecture. The deeper one looks, the more it seems that the Sumerians were not struggling to understand their world. They were implementing a worldview that already felt complete. Whether it came from forgotten generations, from memories shaped by disaster, or from something more elusive, is a question scholars have debated quietly for decades. But the tablets remain, and their silence continues to press against the edges of our understanding. Somewhere between the mud brick walls of the earliest temples and the quiet certainty of those first inscriptions lies a discontinuity, a place where human thought should have been forming, but appears instead fully formed. And if this is true, if the framework predates the documents that preserve it, then what mind shaped it, and what memory carried it into the age of writing? The clay does not answer. It only waits, as though daring us to consider whether the first cities were building something new or merely awakening to something already there. Across the shifting plains where the Euphrates once wandered like an unpredictable serpent, archaeologists uncovered another layer of the puzzle. Settlements from the Ubaid and Uruk horizons that show growth in architecture, pottery, and irrigation, yet reveal almost nothing about the profound ideological leap that followed. These people lived in reed houses, fished in shallow waters, carved small figurines of enigmatic posture, and buried their dead beneath simple floors. Their world was fragile, precarious, shaped by river movements and marshland storms. And yet, when cities emerged above their remains, the worldview encoded into clay tablets seems to belong to a mind far more structured than the landscape that preceded it. It is as if the cognitive distance between these early settlements and the first monumental temples spans centuries of lost memory, rather than a continuous developmental line. What gives this impression is not merely the absence of intermediate stages, but the presence of astonishing administrative precision in the earliest written records. At Uruk, scribes used tokens and bullae, clay envelopes filled with counting stones, to track goods long before they invented writing. But even this system, as innovative as it was, does not predict the sudden complexity of the proto-cuneiform tablets. When the writing finally appears, it arrives not as a hesitant notation, but as a system capable of managing entire economies. The first signs depict commodities, temples, officials, and gods in ways that imply existing structures, established hierarchies, and accepted practices. One cannot help but feel that writing crystallized something already old, something resilient, something that had traveled through memory rather than invention. The temples of the early cities give further weight to this suspicion. The Eanna precinct, with its layered construction phases, reveals an administrative quarter long before its inscriptions survive. Wide courtyards, storage pits, and workshops signal the presence of organized labor and ritual systemization. Yet the theological framework that should have matured alongside these structures appears abruptly. No wall painting or artifact from the earliest layers anticipates a divine assembly of 50 gods, each with defined jurisdictions over celestial and earthly domains. There is no gradual emergence of roles or attributes. Instead, the pantheon enters history as though it had been waiting behind the curtain, stepping onto the stage already rehearsed. Some scholars propose that the missing link lies in environmental trauma. Geological surveys around the Persian Gulf reveal cycles of severe flooding that could have erased low-lying settlements repeatedly. Mud deposits several meters thick suggest entire communities may have vanished, along with whatever belief systems guided them. The memory of such devastation appears in Sumerian myth as the flood that divides antediluvian kings from their historical successors. Yet even this explanation is incomplete. A deluge can erase objects, but can it erase stages of thought? Can it strip away evolving theology while leaving behind a fully articulated system that feels older than the soil itself? Or did catastrophe serve not as erasure but as catalyst, an event that demanded new forms of organization, accelerating the birth of structured authority? The question grows heavier when considering the Sumerian king list once more. Its earliest entries mention cities like Eridu, Bad Tibira, and Shuruppak, places where archaeologists have indeed found deep occupational layers, but where no evidence of such long-lived kings or divine-sanctioned monarchy has emerged. The list treats these early rulers not as mythic figures, but as administrative precedents, bearers of a kingship that descended from an unseen realm. The precision of its language echoes temple accounting tablets, suggesting the scribes did not view these records as allegory. Their confidence implies continuity of concept, not invention. Yet the physical record refuses to cooperate, offering no artifacts capable of bridging the gap. One might expect that evidence of cultural transmission, trade routes, shared symbols, early migrations, would provide clues. Instead, those traces deepen the mystery. From the Iranian plateau to northern Mesopotamia, artifacts show stylistic variation, but little hint of shared theological frameworks. No precursor to the Anunnaki appears in surrounding regions. No earlier council of gods with similar responsibilities. The Sumerians seem to stand alone in their sudden sophistication, as though the blueprint for their worldview came from a place beyond regional cultural exchange. The question of why the earliest texts emphasize administration rather than devotion adds another layer of peculiarity. The gods of these first tablets are not celebrated with poetic exaltation. They are managed, accounted for, treated as part of a functioning institution. Rations for Ninhursag, offerings for Inanna, duties assigned to Enlil. All of it resembles a cosmic economy rather than a pantheon of unpredictable natural powers. It is as though the gods existed not to explain the world, but to govern it, leaving worship as a secondary layer built around the deeper concept of oversight. Why would the earliest cities imagine the universe this way unless they felt they were inheriting, not constructing, an order that preceded them? The silence of the pre-Uruk centuries hangs over these questions, like a shadow cast by something just out of sight. It is a silence that hints at loss, not just of artifacts but of context, of the intellectual path that humanity walked before writing, caught it mid-stride. The Sumerians wrote as though the framework they described was already ancient, already established, already woven into the structure of existence itself. And when one considers how seamlessly that framework integrated with the demands of early urban life, it becomes difficult not to wonder whether the first cities shaped the concept of cosmic order, or whether the concept of cosmic order shaped the first cities. As the clay tablets continue to yield their quiet testimony, one is left with an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the earliest beliefs of humanity were not inventions born from fear or imagination, but reflections of something their world required, or remembered, or could not escape. And if that is true, then what force first taught them to think in terms of order, hierarchy, and judgment? And why does that influence still linger in the way societies justify power today? There are layers of earth in southern Mesopotamia where the soil feels strangely undisturbed, as though the centuries passed quietly over them, hiding not just objects, but intentions. Excavators at Eridu once brushed aside the remnants of early hearths, fragments of clay vessels, and traces of modest shrines, simple spaces where people cooked, gathered, and whispered prayers to forces they could not yet name. Nothing in these early structures suggests the presence of a rigid cosmic hierarchy. No elaborate iconography, no temples shaped with axial precision, no symbols of divine assemblies. Yet a mere handful of generations later, in the very same region, the first monumental platforms rise from the ground, aligned to cardinal directions, layered with altars and courtyards, built with a confidence that implies planning rather than experimentation. Something changed between these levels, something that does not leave a clear trail. The emergence of these early temples coincides with an uptick in irrigation complexity. Canals stretched across the plains, miles long, requiring coordination between villages that previously acted independently. Water, the lifeblood of the region, demanded rules. When to open gates, how to share flow, who would maintain embankments. Archaeological evidence of canal systems near ancient sites like Tel al-Ubaid reveals patterns of construction that seem too synchronized for loosely organized communities. Coordination suggests authority, and authority begs explanation. Yet instead of leaving behind signs of chieftains or councils emerging from within the community, the earliest inscriptions speak of authority arriving from above, not geographically but conceptually. The more closely one looks at the transition from village to city, the more abrupt it appears. Cultural traits such as pottery styles and building methods evolve gradually, but the conceptual framework of Sumerian society does not. It is as if the moment writing appears, it captures a worldview that had no adolescence. The earliest tablets describing the Anunnaki portray them not as nature spirits, but as celestial administrators, beings whose primary role is to assign responsibilities, enforce boundaries, and determine outcomes. These functions mirror the very challenges facing early urban life, yet they appear in the texts before cities have fully developed their tangible infrastructure. How could theology anticipate the needs of a society not yet built? Some researchers have suggested that the Sumerians encoded lessons from earlier, forgotten disasters into mythic form. Geological studies of the region reveal periods of extreme drought and catastrophic flooding during the late Ubaid period. Sediment cores extracted near the ancient shoreline show abrupt changes in water salinity and river patterns, the kind of environmental instability that could wipe away entire villages and force survivors to reorganize. It is possible that out of such trauma came a new understanding of governance, one shaped by the necessity of collective survival. But this idea still fails to explain why the resulting belief system appears so polished, so structured, so aligned with the principles of administration rather than fear or superstition. In the oldest myths, creation is not a dramatic moment of divine will, but a process of separation and assignment. Heaven and earth are divided, roles are distributed among gods, and cosmic boundaries are enforced. These stories lack the imaginative chaos found in later mythologies worldwide. There is no cosmic egg, no warring siblings, no primal hunt. Instead, the universe is treated like a system that must be organized to function, a reflection of a mind trained in management rather than imagination. The logic feels almost bureaucratic, as though the myths were not creative explanations, but reflections of a worldview already rooted in structured governance. The presence of divine councils reinforces this impression. In multiple texts, decisions are made collectively by assemblies of gods, echoing structures that would later be formalized in temple councils and city administrations. These assemblies are not portrayed as symbolic gatherings, but as institutions with authority and procedure. Their decisions are final, their judgments binding, their roles clearly defined. Such precision invites a troubling question. Were humans modeling their institutions after the gods? Or were the gods modeled after institutions humans had been taught to maintain? The material culture of early Sumer offers hints but not answers. Cylinder seals from the earliest levels show scenes of agricultural labor, feasting, and ritual activity, but few depict gods directly. Instead, they reveal patterns of work, exchange, and coordination. People plow fields in unison, carry goods in procession, gather in what appear to be organized groups. The imagery suggests a society aware of its interconnectedness, yet the theological system that would eventually justify this interdependence seems to emerge without visual precedent. The absence of transitional iconography deepens the mystery. How did a complex cosmic framework arise from a visual tradition that shows little interest in depicting the divine? The question grows larger when one considers how seamlessly the concept of delegated authority integrates into the earliest written laws. When scribes record disputes, boundaries, or transactions, they often invoke gods not as metaphysical enforcers, but as overseers of procedure. The belief that divine judgment is immediate and inescapable, this idea appears fully formed, with no textual development leading to it. Why did a society newly introduced to writing already possess a worldview in which moral consequence is absolute, universal, and administered by unseen councils? It is possible, some argue, that the Sumerians believed they were preserving rather than inventing. The language of inheritance permeates their hymns and myths. The Anunnaki are said to have existed before humanity, before cities, even before the earth took shape. Their authority is portrayed as primordial, not crafted by human imagination, but discovered through ritual and observation. Such claims could be allegorical, but they may also hint at memories carried across generations, memories of teachings, migrations, or traditions from a time beyond archaeological detection. What remains certain is that the gap between physical evidence and conceptual sophistication remains wide. The soil preserves artifacts of daily life, but the mind that shaped early Sumerian belief still hides behind them. Something guided the first cities toward a worldview centered on structure, hierarchy, and moral oversight. Whether it was born from trauma, inherited from forgotten ancestors, or emerged through some other means yet unknown, the result reshaped the ancient world and continues to echo in systems of authority that govern societies today. Yet the silence between these layers persists, like a space where a crucial piece should be. And if that missing piece represented a transition in how humans understood the world, what force compelled such a shift? And why did it leave so few traces behind? There is a point in the archaeological record where the ground itself seems to hesitate, as if aware that what lies beneath it no longer matches what rises above. In the deep foundations of Uruk's earliest districts, beneath layers of later temples and storerooms, excavators uncovered vast courts paved with beaten clay, bordered by narrow corridors where scribes once moved with tablets still warm from the fire. These spaces were not sanctuaries in the modern sense. They were administrative lungs, inhaling and exhaling the movement of grain, wool, livestock, laborers. Yet within these same complexes stood altars dedicated to gods whose roles mirrored the tasks performed by the workers around them. To modernize, it appears as an overlap, ritual and bureaucracy fused so completely that it becomes difficult to tell which one justified the other. But to the people who built these early structures, the distinction may never have existed at all. Inanna's temple, the Iana precinct, became the epicenter of this strange convergence. Even in its earliest incarnations, the precinct displays a scale that feels disproportionate to the population it served. Its courtyards span distances that early communities should not have needed. Its warehouses exceed the storage capacity required for local harvests, and its administrative wings appear built for a complexity that archaeology cannot detect in surrounding layers. One interpretation is that Uruk expanded rapidly, and its temples grew with it. Another is that the temple anticipated a scale of organization not yet present, an architectural imprint of a system already imagined before it was lived. Inanna herself is not portrayed in early art as a capricious goddess of fertility or war, but as a figure of authority, tied to celestial cycles and rituals that governed both timekeeping and trade. Such attributes align more closely with the roles of a sovereign administrator than a nature spirit. It is from this intersection that a deeper, more enigmatic question emerges. Were temples designed to house deities, or were deities shaped to inhabit the needs of the temple? The presence of proto-writing strengthens this puzzle. Even before true cuneiform appears, marks on clay tokens indicate categories of goods, professions, and perhaps even forms of obligation. These tokens, found at sites like Susa, Jemdet-Nazar, and Uruk, suggest networks of exchange that stretched across distances longer than a day's walk. Yet none of the surviving early tokens depict gods or mythic narratives. They are instruments of management, not religion. And yet, when true writing emerges shortly after, deities enter the record fully formed, complete with titles and responsibilities. It is as if writing served not to invent the pantheon, but to reveal a structure long assumed, long spoken, but never previously pressed into clay. Outside the cities, the archaeological landscape tells a different story. Small farming settlements continued their quiet routines, harvesting barley, tending goats, repairing reed boats. Their graves contained simple goods, shell beads, modest tools, occasional figurines with elongated heads or clasped hands. These artifacts hint at ritual, but not at a cosmology capable of sustaining the weight of divine councils and cosmic order. If the grand theology of early Sumer had roots in the countryside, the signs are faint. And if it originated elsewhere, no clear path of transmission has yet emerged. Unlike later civilizations whose pantheons show diffusion from shared myths or trade networks, the Sumerian framework seems strikingly singular, almost isolated in its complexity. The question grows sharper when considering how seamlessly these beliefs integrated into the political reality of early cities. Boundary stones from Lagash, carved centuries later but reflecting older traditions, invoke gods not to inspire fear, but to enforce clarity. Their inscriptions call upon deities to witness land grants, to observe transactions, to ensure fairness in disputes between communities. The language is procedural, not poetic. Divine oversight replaces personal vengeance. Cosmic authority supersedes clan loyalty. Such shifts require time, yet they appear early and without textual predecessors. Why would the earliest urban societies frame their governance through a cosmic legal system unless they believed that justice itself was not a human invention, but a pre-existing order. In daily life, this belief manifested in quiet but persistent ways. Bread rations allocated to temple workers were recorded with the same care as offerings to deities. The number of livestock driven through temple gates was monitored as meticulously as the performance of rituals timed to lunar cycles. Even artisans carving delicate cylinder seals appeared influenced by the structure they inhabited. Scenes of orderly procession, animals led in ranks, and workers at their tasks reflect a worldview in which harmony arises from coordination rather than spontaneity. The art conveys calm, control, and predictability, qualities rarely associated with early civilizations still finding their footing. Yet behind this serene facade lies a lingering tension, the lack of contradiction in the early record. Later cultures struggled with competing myths, with fragmentation of belief, with pantheons shifting as political power changed hands. But Sumerian texts exhibit an uncanny consistency. The Anunnaki remain judges, administrators, arbiters of destiny. Their roles do not fluctuate with regime changes. Their authority does not unravel with time. This stability suggests not invention, but inheritance, an ideological structure carried intact across generations. If the Sumerians were inheritors, then what was the source of their inheritance? Was it a memory transmitted through oral tradition, refined over centuries before reaching the clay? Was it knowledge encoded in ritual rather than text, surviving environmental collapse where artifacts did not? Or was it a conceptual leap born from necessity, a society recognizing that survival required a framework stronger than individual wills? Whatever the origin, the consistency remains. And with it comes the unsettling possibility that the earliest beliefs governing humanity's first cities were not tentative steps into the unknown, but steps guided by a system older than writing itself. A system whose traces can still be felt in the expectations modern societies place upon law, authority, and moral consequence. Yet even as the pieces begin to align, one question persists like a faint echo in the corridors of ancient temples. If the Sumerians inherited their cosmic order, what kind of world first shaped the principles they preserved, and why did its traces vanish so completely? Among the oldest tablets recovered from Uruk, there is one that historians sometimes mention in passing but rarely dwell upon. It records an oath sworn before the Anunnaki in a dispute over farmland, a small conflict by ancient standards, hardly worthy of myth. Yet the scribe who pressed the wedges into clay wrote with a conviction that seems disproportionate to the event. He did not appeal to the gods as distant arbiters residing in unreachable heavens. He wrote as though they were present, watching, aware of the truth before either party spoke. The certainty that divine judgment was immediate, undeniable, and woven into the world itself suggests a worldview already fully steeped in concepts of oversight and accountability. The question is not why the Sumerians invoked the Anunnaki, but how they came to assume that such beings were the rightful witnesses to human action. The landscape these tablets emerged from was not one of stability. Geological surveys reveal that the region experienced shifts in river courses so severe they could erase entire towns overnight. Settlements discovered along ancient channels show signs of abrupt abandonment. Walls half standing, hearths cold, storage pits still half full. When the Euphrates changed path, It left formerly fertile fields stranded in arid land, forcing entire communities to migrate. Such instability may explain the urgency with which early societies sought frameworks that outlasted environmental chaos. Yet what remains puzzling is the nature of the framework they chose. Rather than deifying rivers or storms, as many early cultures did, the Sumerians imagined a cosmic council, beings who deliberated, judged, and assigned roles. Their gods behaved not like forces of nature, but like administrators whose authority derived from procedure, not impulse. This emphasis on order becomes clearer when examining the earliest god lists. Compiled centuries after their mythic origins, they nevertheless preserve a structure that appears unchanged from the moment it entered writing. The lists do not show a top god slowly accumulating authority, nor do they depict competing tribal deities merging into a unified pantheon. Instead, they present an organized hierarchy. Sky gods, earth gods, underworld gods, each with defined duties, and above, or perhaps within, all of them, the Anunnaki as the arbiters of cosmic balance. Their authority is not narrative, it is structural. It reads less like myth and more like an administrative manual. One could argue that such order reflects the needs of the first cities. But cities were not yet stable enough to demand such consistent ideological architecture. Uruk in its earliest phase was a patchwork of expanding neighborhoods, provisional walls, and experimental institutions. For such an environment to produce a theology grounded in timeless, impersonal authority feels almost inverted. One would expect belief systems to evolve as the city did, messy, adaptive, inconsistent. Instead, the beliefs arrive polished, unchanging, ready to justify a complexity that the physical city had not yet achieved. The appearance of astronomical records on early tablets only deepens this inversion. Scribes tracked the movements of Venus, the moon, and certain stars with surprising regularity. These were not idle observations. They were tied to agricultural cycles, festival dates, and ritual obligations. The accuracy of these early records implies generations of prior observation, yet no material evidence of such long-term tracking has been found in earlier strata. It is as if the knowledge arrived fully formed, integrated into daily practice without visible precedent. The association between celestial movement and divine intention suggests that the Sumerians perceived the universe as a governed space, its order discoverable through careful attention rather than mythic storytelling. Another fragment, preserved in a museum far from the land where it was first unearthed, lists specific roles assigned to various gods. One overseeing irrigation, another supervising livestock fertility, another tied to the timing of festivals. These assignments are so detailed, so practical, that they blur the line between religion and civil administration. The absence of earlier, simpler forms of divine representation challenges the assumption that Sumerian theology gradually expanded from animism or nature worship. Instead, it resembles a pre-existing system transcribed into clay, a conceptual inheritance whose origins remain obscured. Even the architecture reflects this sense of inherited order. Temples like those in Eridu and Uruk show continuity in design principles that is difficult to reconcile with the shifts expected across centuries. Foundation plans repeat with minor variations, altars appear in consistent orientations, and offerings follow patterns that suggest ritual standardization long before writing. If these rituals evolved slowly, Their earlier forms have vanished so completely that archaeology offers no transitional links. If they were introduced suddenly, the question becomes, introduced by whom or by what? Later mythic texts, though composed centuries after the first cities rose, preserve clues that the Sumerians themselves viewed their knowledge as inherited rather than invented. Hymns describe the Anunnaki as existing before the land was raised from the waters, a poetic phrase that scholars interpret in various ways. But beneath its metaphor lies an implication that the authority of these beings preceded the formation of the physical world, or at least of human society. Such descriptions may reflect symbolic memory, yet their persistence across centuries suggests a deeper resonance, a cultural conviction that order itself had origins beyond human experience. Still, perhaps the most striking feature of the early Sumerian worldview is not its complexity, but its stability. Over centuries of political conflict, shifting alliances, and environmental upheaval, the core theological architecture persists. Kings might rise and fall, empires fracture and reform, but the belief that authority flows from a higher order remains intact. This continuity hints at a system rooted more deeply than political power can reach, one carried through ritual, practice, and expectation. Yet the origins of this system remain shrouded. The ground holds tools, walls, pottery, but not the turning point, not the intellectual moment when humans first began to conceive of authority as something abstract, external, and binding. If that moment occurred, its traces are lost. And if it did not, if the earliest cities merely revealed a framework that had always been there, then we must ask what shaped that framework, and why it fit the needs of civilization so precisely from the very beginning. The silence of the archaeological layers invites the question whether humanity's earliest beliefs emerged from invention or recollection. And if recollection, then what memory, half preserved, half forgotten, guided the hands that pressed the first wedge into the first clay tablet, recording a world already governed by laws older than writing? In the vast refuse pits surrounding ancient Uruk, archaeologists found fragments so ordinary that, at first glance, they seemed unworthy of attention. Discarded shards, broken tokens, remnants of daily bookkeeping. Yet as these fragments were painstakingly pieced together, patterns began to emerge that cast a quiet shadow over the conventional narrative of civilization's rise. Many tablets, even those used briefly before being thrown away, contain not only accounts of grain or livestock, but references to divine jurisdictions already fixed, cosmic roles already known. The impression is startling. The earliest written records treat the cosmos as an institution with departments, responsibilities, and oversight, as though humanity had stepped into a world where order was not a discovery, but a given. This is not the picture one expects from a culture taking its first steps toward complexity. When writing appears in Egypt centuries later, it unfolds alongside evolving religious symbolism, with gods gradually accumulating attributes as artistic representation grows more sophisticated. In the Indus Valley, although the script remains undeciphered, religious motifs seem to evolve through shifts in iconography. But in Mesopotamia, the moment writing crystallizes, theology stands before it fully articulated, waiting to be inscribed. It is as if belief and administration matured in parallel before either left a clear archaeological trace, an alignment so precise it invites questions about what preceded it. the environment offers few answers. The southern alluvium is harsh on organic remains. Wood, leather, and cloth disappear quickly, leaving stone and baked clay as the primary witnesses to millennia. But even allowing for the region's destructive climate, the absence of transitional forms, proto-myths, experimental deity lists, early symbolic art remains conspicuous. Instead, the gap between the modest shrines of the Ubaid period and the institutional temples of Uruk feels like an unseen chasm. The leap from household offerings to a pantheon with defined cosmic duties suggests either rapid development under pressures we do not yet understand, or the survival of an older, underlying system carried silently into the age of cities. This sense of silent preservation becomes more pronounced when examining the first legal concepts. Boundary markers appear surprisingly early, their inscriptions invoking divine witnesses in formulas that show no signs of evolution. A typical boundary text does not plead for divine support. It declares it, invoking the Anunnaki as guardians of truth, as if their authority were self-evident. The language resembles legal precedent rather than religious poetry. And if precedent exists, where are its roots? Were such formulas inherited orally? Did they originate in communities that left no inscriptions? Or did the Sumerians believe they were codifying a structure they did not craft, but discovered? The social world around these early cities reflects similar contradictions. Excavations of domestic areas reveal workshops specializing in weaving, pottery, and metallurgy. Classes of workers, acolytes, administrators, farmers, appear in early administrative accounts, but their rise is not marked by the gradual stratification seen in other early civilizations. Instead, hierarchy appears sharply delineated, as though society organized itself around a template rather than evolving through trial and error. Even burial customs exhibit unusual coherence. Bodies laid in crouched positions, accompanied by modest goods, suggesting a belief in continuity without the elaborate progression later seen in Egypt or the Levant. Material culture mirrors this quiet order. Cylinder seals, the personal signatures of ancient officials, show scenes of controlled labor. Orderly lines of workers, domesticated animals led in procession, figures standing before seated authority. While some depict ritual moments, they avoid the dramatic mythic scenes familiar from later periods. Instead, they emphasize roles: who works, who oversees, who records. It is a visual language of hierarchy long before the textual language explains it. The seals feel like reflections of a system already internalized, one whose origins cannot be easily traced through conventional archaeological layers. Intriguingly, certain symbols that appear on early seals, such as rosettes, stepped motifs, and celestial diagrams, show continuity across centuries. Their meaning is not always clear, but their persistence suggests conceptual stability. If these symbols represent ideas about cosmic order, then the worldview behind them survived environmental upheaval, political collapse, and linguistic change. Such consistency raises a quiet yet unsettling question. Were the Sumerians preserving a memory older than their own architecture, older even than their own language? Later Mesopotamian texts offer tantalizing hints. The mythic cycles describe eras before writing, before kingship, before cities, periods in which the gods established order through assignment rather than creation. These stories portray organization as primordial, not emergent, and divine councils as the source of legitimacy. While centuries separate these myths from the earliest tablets, their consistency suggests a belief in inheritance, not innovation. The rituals that accompanied these tales reinforce this impression. Festivals timed to lunar cycles, offerings made according to strict schedules, recitations performed in prescribed rhythms. These practices functioned less as acts of devotion than as affirmations of a cosmic system believed to be perpetual. Yet the most telling evidence may lie not in the artifacts, but in their absences. There are no contradictory theologies from the earliest layers, no competing pantheons gradually merging, no regional variants that suggest evolving narratives. Instead, from the moment the Anunnaki enter the record, they occupy the same conceptual ground: judges, administrators, arbiters of destiny. Their consistency through time implies an origin older than the texts that reference them. If they were inventions, they were invented once and with striking precision. This raises a delicate possibility. Perhaps the Sumerians did not attempt to explain the world through myth. Perhaps they perceived themselves as participating in a structure that already defined the world. In such a case, writing was not the birth of belief, but the memorialization of something long understood. If so, the real mystery is not why the earliest civilizations imagined cosmic order, but why that order appears so complete, so stable, and so ready for inscription the moment the first stylus touched the first clay tablet. And if the Sumerians truly believed they were inheriting rather than inventing, then one must ask what memory, what trauma, or what forgotten encounter had shaped their conviction so deeply that it became indistinguishable from reality. A conviction strong enough to survive 5,000 years and still whisper through the legal and moral structures of the world we inhabit today. As archaeologists traced the expansion of early cities outward from the temples at their centers, they discovered something unexpected in the pattern of settlement itself. Villages that once stood independently, each governed by its own customs and kinship lines, began to merge into sprawling urban zones with shared labor and unified administration. This consolidation was not gradual. It occurred with a speed that surprised even the most cautious researchers. Clay tablets from the earliest strata already reference officials responsible for entire districts, scribes overseeing distribution networks, and priests coordinating rituals across multiple neighborhoods. The scale of cooperation seems disproportionate to the visible material record, as if people adopted complex collective behavior before the social mechanisms that usually generate such cohesion had fully developed. It is here, in this gap between structure and evidence, that the faint shape of an older influence begins to appear. The first signs of urban planning reinforce this sense of inherited order. Excavations at the early levels of Uruk reveal streets arranged with a precision difficult to attribute to trial and error expansion. Drainage systems channel runoff with forethought, and massive walls rise not as defensive afterthoughts, but as planned elements of the city's layout. Yet these engineering feats emerge before the appearance of detailed administrative instructions in the written record. Tools, construction techniques, and even organizational methods required for large-scale projects seem to materialize as if the knowledge had been circulating long before it was formally recorded. Scholars have long debated whether this reflects lost developmental phases or the survival of an older knowledge tradition, one preserved not in artifacts, but in shared expectations about how a city should function. At the same time, the agricultural hinterlands surrounding the cities reveal clues that deepen the puzzle. Canals from this period show remarkable uniformity in gradient, width, and alignment, suggesting systematic surveying practices. But the instruments needed for such precision, measuring ropes, standardized weights, calibrated markers, do not appear in the archaeological record until centuries later. How then did early communities coordinate irrigation on a scale that required not only cooperation, but shared conceptual frameworks of measurement? Some researchers propose that knowledge of surveying may have originated from earlier, undocumented traditions. Others look to the earliest star charts and wonder whether the people who tracked lunar and planetary cycles also used those cycles to orient their world on the ground. The celestial link becomes harder to ignore when considering the orientation of major temples. Many early structures align with cardinal directions or heliacal risings of prominent stars. Inanna's precinct, for example, appears positioned in relation to Venus's movements, an association that would require long-term observation across generations. Yet the earliest evidence for astronomical record-keeping appears suddenly and without clear antecedent. The alignment of architecture to celestial cycles suggests more than ritual symbolism. It indicates a worldview in which heavens and earth were governed by the same principles of order. This worldview aligns seamlessly with the idea of cosmic administration described in later myths. Divine councils assigning roles, enforcing boundaries, and maintaining stability. The question remains, how did the earliest builders know to mirror cosmic patterns in earthly structures? Trade networks add another thread to this tapestry. From the Iranian plateau to the shores of Anatolia, goods flowed into Mesopotamian cities. Lapis lazuli, tin, obsidian, rare stones. Yet the symbolic systems associated with these items rarely resemble the Sumerian worldview. No foreign pantheon resembles the Anunnaki in form or function. No neighboring society organizes their gods into councils with judicial authority. The Sumerian system stands apart, fully realized, self-contained. Cultural diffusion does not explain its origin. Neither does gradual internal development. Instead, the system enters history with a clarity that implies either a rapid consolidation of ideas or the persistent echo of something older, preserved despite political, environmental, and cultural change. Daily life reflects this coherence. Households follow consistent architectural patterns: central courtyards, side rooms for storage, niches for ritual practice. Tools display standardized forms across wide regions. Food preparation methods, such as grinding grain on saddle querns or brewing barley beer in large vats, remain stable through centuries. This stability suggests a shared set of norms, yet the belief system that accompanies these norms exhibits far greater complexity than the material culture alone can explain. The theological framework appears as a skeleton underlying the physical rhythms of life, guiding behavior even when unspoken. When a worker receives his ration or a farmer marks the date for planting, both acts tie into a larger cycle governed by divine oversight. The continuity between cosmic structure and earthly practice becomes even more pronounced in the construction of early legal traditions. From the earliest boundary disputes to later law codes, The idea that justice exists independently of human will recurs with striking consistency. When a scribe invokes the Anunnaki as witnesses to a land transfer, he does not do so poetically. He uses a formula that implies immediate consequence, as though the divine council monitors human agreements with the same attention given to celestial cycles. This consistency across centuries suggests that the concept of external, objective authority was not an innovation, but an inheritance, one strong enough to endure political upheaval, regional conflicts, and shifts in language. And yet, throughout all of this, the missing foundation remains, an absence of early theological development that should logically precede such a sophisticated worldview. No fragmentary myths, no transitional iconography, no evolving depictions of gods gaining roles or merging identities. Instead, the Anunnaki appear in the record like judges entering a courtroom already built, already furnished, already governed by rules no one bothers to explain. The silence that precedes them is not empty. It is dense, like a curtain hiding a scene prepared before the audience arrives. If this silence conceals not the birth of belief, but its transmission, then the question shifts dramatically. What kind of memory survives environmental collapse, migration, and cultural transformation without fragmenting? What kind of framework can remain intact long enough to shape the world's first cities? And if the Sumerians did inherit such a framework, from whom, or from what, did they receive it? The answers elude both excavation and inscription, leaving behind only a faint imprint, a sense that humanity stepped into a story already written, guided by principles older than the societies that first recorded them. When scholars turn their attention to the Sumerian king list, they often speak cautiously, aware that the document sits at an uncomfortable intersection of myth and administration. Yet if one reads it as the scribes intended, not as folklore but as chronology, the text offers a glimpse into a worldview that seems too structured, too confident to reflect invention. The list begins with a declaration that still reverberates through academic debate. When kingship descended from heaven. The phrase is not metaphorical in tone. It is procedural, almost contractual, as though kingship were not created by human society, but transferred from a pre-existing order. The idea that authority originates outside of human hands appears fully formed in this earliest record, without evolved precedents or competing interpretations. It is this abruptness that gives the list its eerie weight, as though it captures not the rise of civilization, but the echo of an earlier architecture of power. The ages assigned to antediluvian rulers deepen the puzzle. Reigns extending tens of thousands of years confound modern interpretations, yet their inclusion in a document otherwise dedicated to administrative accuracy suggests that the scribes were not indulging in poetic exaggeration. They used the same numerical systems for these reigns as they did for temple rations and land surveys. If these numbers represent symbolic memory, the symbols themselves remain opaque, pointing not toward fantasy but toward a forgotten framework of time, one that measured legitimacy rather than lifespan. And beneath these impossible durations lies a pattern. Kingship moves from city to city like a mantle passed along a predetermined route. The logic of succession appears external, unaltered by human ambition, guided instead by principles the scribes did not question. Archaeological layers beneath cities named in the list, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, contain remnants of early settlement, but none align with the colossal durations or cosmic legitimacy implied by the text. Instead, the excavated evidence suggests modest communities with ordinary lifespans, leaving scholars to grapple with a conceptual mismatch. Were the antediluvian kings symbolic placeholders for cycles of power we no longer understand? Did they represent memories of leaders predating the rise of cities, preserved in ways that transcended human chronology? Or was the king list attempting to record something its scribes perceived as inherited, a tradition carried from an earlier societal configuration, one lost to floods, migrations, or transformations invisible to archaeology? The flood that divides the list acts as a boundary not only in myth but in cultural memory. Geological surveys reveal that the Mesopotamian basin experienced episodes of severe inundation, though none match the global catastrophe later mythology imagines. Yet even localized floods could erase extensive settlements, sweeping away tablets, temples, and entire chapters of human experience. In this light, the flood becomes less a historical anomaly and more a metaphor for cultural rupture, the point where memory frays, where continuity is severed, leaves behind a sense of inheritance without origin. The fact that kingship resumes after the flood with human-scale reigns suggests a recalibration, a return to temporal rhythms measurable in years rather than cosmic cycles. But the principle of descending authority remains unchanged, as if the flood erased the world, but not the framework that governed it. Later inscriptions provide further clues to the persistence of this framework. Coronation hymns from the city of Ur describe rulers not as conquerors, but as stewards. One hymn recounts how a king receives the scepter only after Enlil consults the Anunnaki, as though divine approval were a procedural requirement. The king's authority depends not on lineage or victory, but on conformity to an external order. The presence of divine councils in these texts suggests a political system modeled on a cosmic one, decisions reached through assembly, legitimacy conferred through deliberation, authority validated by a higher tier of governance. This resemblance between earthly and celestial administration poses a challenging question. Did humans mirror their institutions after their gods? Or did they conceive of their gods in the image of institutions they believed to be primordial? Boundary stones from Lagash and Nippur deepen this interplay between divine order and earthly law. Some bear carved curses invoking cosmic punishment for those who violate agreements, not as superstition, but as legal reinforcement. The text does not threaten physical retribution by earthly forces. It appeals to a system of justice believed to be encoded into the structure of existence. In these inscriptions, the Anunnaki function as guarantors of truth, their judgments immediate and inescapable. This understanding of moral reality, where consequence transcends human enforcement, suggests a worldview rooted not in political expediency, but in a deeper conviction that order precedes rulers, that law predates kings. Even the concept of rebellion carries a distinct tone in early Mesopotamian literature. When rulers fall, scribes often attribute their downfall not to military failure, but to divine withdrawal. Kings lose battles because they lose legitimacy. Famine arrives because cosmic balance is disrupted. This framing reflects a belief that political stability depends on alignment with a higher order. Its consistency across centuries indicates a tradition too cohesive to have been built through slow accumulation. Instead, it reads like an inherited philosophy, one internalized so completely that no surviving text questions its origin. Yet the absence of transitional documents lingers. There are no records describing the moment kingship descended, no early hymns exploring how gods came to deliberate in councils, no myths explaining the formation of the Anunnaki's roles. These ideas enter history fully formed, without narrative scaffolding. What remains is an ideological skeleton without visible predecessors, suggesting either extraordinary loss or extraordinary antiquity. And if loss is the explanation, the scale of that loss must be immense, encompassing not only artifacts, but the intellectual pathways that shaped the earliest human societies. So the king list stands as both witness and enigma, a document that reveals a structured belief system while obscuring its foundations. Its voice is quiet but insistent, hinting at a world where legitimacy flowed downward from an unseen realm, where time itself was measured by the endurance of authority rather than the span of lives. And if this worldview reflects a memory rather than invention, then one must ask what kind of social order existed before the flood of history erased its traces, and why the echo of that order persisted long enough to become the bedrock of civilization. In the myths that survived the shifting sands of Mesopotamia, there is a recurring motif that seems almost understated at first glance. The gods do not create the world through spontaneous force or divine command. They organize it. The distinction is subtle but profound. In texts like the Enuma Elish, the universe begins not in chaos born of conflict, but in undifferentiated waters, fresh and salt, mingling without structure. When form emerges, it does so through separation, categorization, and assignment. Heaven is raised apart from the earth. Roles are distributed, boundaries are drawn. Creation unfolds like the establishment of an institution, not the eruption of a miracle. This emphasis on order rather than origin reflects a worldview deeply aligned with administrative logic, as though the cosmos itself mirrored the bureaucratic rhythms of an ancient city. The presence of divine councils reinforces this interpretation. While other civilizations often portray gods acting individually, guided by emotion or rivalry, the Mesopotamian pantheon operates through assembly. Decisions are debated, then finalized through collective judgment. Even cosmic transformation, such as the elevation of Marduk in Babylon's later tradition, requires ratification by the Anunnaki. Their approval is what legitimizes power, not victory in combat or inheritance. The idea that authority must be recognized to exist resonates with a deeply ingrained belief in procedural legitimacy. But this belief, fully articulated in the earliest texts, raises a difficult question. How did the concept of structured cosmic governance arise so early, without any visible period of theological experimentation? The language of the myths offers hints. Gods do not randomly receive their roles, they are appointed. They do not wander across the heavens without purpose, they travel assigned routes. The stars themselves, as later astronomical tablets reveal, were understood as markers of divine order, lights placed with intention in the sky to signal time, seasons, and ritual requirements. These associations demand long-term observation, yet no earlier records show the development of such celestial interpretation. Instead, once writing appears, the system is already mature. The alignment of temples to heavenly bodies, The timing of festivals to lunar phases, the connection between planetary movement and divine presence, all of it enters the historical record with a confidence that suggests inheritance rather than invention. The Enuma Elish, though compiled later in Babylon, preserves echoes of older Sumerian ideas. In its narrative, Marduk does not create humanity out of benevolence or curiosity. He creates humans so that the gods may rest from labor. The text states this plainly, almost matter-of-factly, as though the purpose of existence is not self-discovery or reverence, but maintenance. Humanity keeps the system running. This utilitarian view contrasts sharply with later mythologies that ascribe to humans a central, cherished place in the cosmos. In Sumerian tradition, people exist to uphold balance, not to dominate or transcend it. This perspective fits the logic of early urban life, where survival depended on meticulous coordination of irrigation, storage, distribution, and ritual timing. But again, the puzzle remains. How did such a functional worldview develop so early, so completely, and so consistently? The rituals tied to these myths provide further clues. Records from the 3rd millennium BCE describe ceremonies performed at specific lunar intervals, offerings prepared according to precise measurements, and processions mirroring celestial movements. Priests acted as intermediaries, not because they alone understood divine will, but because they maintained the cosmic schedule. The predictability of these rituals reflects a universe perceived as structured, not volatile, a system whose harmony must be protected through disciplined observance. Yet the absence of earlier ritual fragments leaves open the question of how such precision emerged. If it evolved gradually, the stages of that evolution have been erased. If it was introduced abruptly, then something extraordinary must have precipitated the shift. In the stories that recount the descent of Inanna to the underworld, the narrative carries a similar tone of procedural inevitability. Inanna faces the Anunnaki not as a rebel confronting tyrants, but as one subject to a higher jurisdiction. Even the goddess of love and war cannot escape their judgment. This portrayal challenges modern assumptions about mythic imagination. Rather than dramatizing conflict for symbolic effect, the story reinforces an unyielding concept. Even the divine must answer to order. Such a notion requires not only imagination, but philosophical conviction. One wonders what experiences shaped such belief. What moments of collapse or crisis taught early societies that unrestrained power, even divine power, must be bounded? Comparative mythology offers limited guidance. While other ancient cultures also depict divine councils, none place such emphasis on deliberation and judicial authority as the Sumerians. The Greek Olympians, though assembled, act with rivalry and impulse. The Egyptian gods maintain cosmic balance, but their roles evolve across dynasties. The Sumerian Anunnaki stand apart in their stability, unchanging in function, unwavering in structure. This stability once again suggests that the system existed before the earliest surviving texts. Perhaps the myths were not attempts to explain the world, but echoes of lessons long preserved, refined through ritual and retelling until they became inseparable from daily life. Even later civilizations that inherited Mesopotamian ideas adapted them, but did not alter their core. Hittite myths feature divine assemblies that deliberate. Ugaritic texts describe councils presided over by elots. Early Hebrew scriptures retain the image of a divine congregation, though later redactions obscure it. Across these traditions, the architecture remains. A high god presiding over lesser beings, decisions reached collectively, legitimacy flowing downward. These patterns persist long after the names of the Sumerian gods fade. They function like fossils of thought, fragments preserving the structure of an ancient worldview even as cultural layers shift above them. Yet for all the coherence of this inherited framework, one cannot ignore the silence beneath it. The absence of early developmental stages, the lack of transitional myths or evolving iconography, leaves a void that archaeology cannot fill. The earliest written myths do not introduce concepts, they affirm them. They articulate not discovery, but continuity. And if continuity exists, then its source lies somewhere beyond the reach of current evidence. Perhaps in oral traditions that predate writing by millennia, perhaps in lost settlements erased by environmental upheaval, perhaps in cognitive frameworks shaped by experiences no longer preserved in material form. Whatever the origin, the myths speak with a certainty that feels older than the tablets that carry them. And if they reflect an inherited understanding of cosmic order, then one must ask, what memory, what forgotten worldview compelled the earliest civilizations to see the universe not as a story unfolding, but as a structure already built, waiting only for its caretakers to step into place? Beyond the rituals and myths, another domain offers clues to the Sumerian understanding of order: agriculture, the quiet engine that sustained their early cities. The Tigris and Euphrates, though generous in their deposits of fertile silt, behaved with an unpredictability that bordered on violence. Their floods came not with the cyclical rhythm of the Nile, but with abrupt surges that could drown entire harvests or leave fields bone dry. Yet the earliest agricultural records from Uruk and its neighboring settlements show an astonishing degree of coordination. Planting seasons were aligned with lunar phases. Irrigation schedules matched celestial observations. Offerings to certain deities, Inanna, Ninurta, Enlil, coincided with the moments when those gods-associated stars rose on the horizon. This intricate system, preserved in tablets used by temple administrators, implies a long tradition of observation and ritualized practice long before writing made it visible. But where is the evidence of this tradition's development? The layers beneath the first tablets remain silent. One of the most striking features of early Mesopotamian agriculture is the precision with which the Sumerians monitored water. Canals discovered near ancient Ur, Lagash, and Eridu reveal engineering choices that imply sophisticated hydrological knowledge. Their gradients are consistent, their lengths optimized for flow, their gates strategically positioned to prevent soil salinization, an issue that would later contribute to the decline of Sumerian fields. What is perplexing is not that the Sumerians mastered irrigation, but that the earliest examples already reflect mastery. There are no primitive canals, no half-formed experiments, no clear prototypes. The system appears functional from its earliest layers, as if shaped by principles transmitted intact rather than gradually refined. Scholars have suggested that this knowledge may have traveled through oral tradition, or through communities whose archaeological traces remain undiscovered. Yet even this explanation struggles to account for the alignment between agricultural cycles and celestial patterns, a connection that presupposes both long-term observation and a worldview connecting heaven and earth. Evidence of astronomical knowledge emerges most clearly in the so-called star lists and administrative notes documenting the appearance of Venus, the phases of the moon, and the risings of specific constellations. These observations were not casual. They dictated everything from harvest festivals to labor quotas. In one tablet associated with the Eanna precinct, priests noted the precise moment when Venus first appeared in the dawn sky, an event tied to rituals invoking Inanna's authority over fertility and renewal. The precision of these recordings implies instruments or methods that have not yet been found. No early observatories, no devices for angular measurement, no star maps preceding the written lists. The knowledge arrives in the record seamlessly, as though the observers inherited tables of celestial patterns rather than constructing them anew. This sense of inheritance feeds into the broader question: what guided the Sumerians toward a universe they believed operated on fixed rules, discoverable through observation yet imposed by powers beyond human control? The connection between temple economies and agricultural cycles strengthens this impression. Temples did not merely receive offerings. They managed vast tracts of farmland, distributed grain, allocated labor, and coordinated seasonal tasks. A single temple could employ hundreds of workers, from scribes to brewers to canal maintenance crews. Yet the structure of these activities appears remarkably stable across regions and centuries. Administrative tablets from Shurupak mirror those from Uruk. Records from Nippur reflect systems found in Lagash. The consistency is so striking that scholars once assumed these practices must have been formalized in now lost legal codes. But even if such documents existed, the uniformity still suggests an underlying conceptual framework, one strong enough to shape practice long before writing captured it. Even more intriguing are the rituals embedded in agricultural life. Certain festivals marking the start of planting or harvesting required reenactments of creation myths. Priests invoked divine decrees, reciting lines that portrayed humanity as caretakers of cosmic order. These rituals were not merely symbolic. They were procedural, ensuring that agricultural work aligned with celestial cycles. Failure to observe the correct rituals, some texts warn, could bring famine or disease. Whether these warnings reflect practical superstition or deeper philosophical belief, the result is the same. Human survival depended on maintaining alignment with a cosmic timetable. Yet again, the absence of transitional evidence raises troubling questions. How did early societies come to perceive the universe as structured in this way? What events taught them to see their work as part of a larger order? Material remains from rural settlements show no signs of theological elaboration. Households used simple tools, flint blades, clay sickles, grinding stones, shaped with minor variations over centuries. If a sophisticated worldview guided their agricultural practices, it left no mark on their tools or domestic spaces. Instead, the worldview emerges only when writing appears, fully formed, fully integrated. This discrepancy between material simplicity and conceptual complexity is difficult to reconcile with traditional models of cultural evolution. It suggests that belief existed independently of technological development, a mental inheritance that shaped daily life without leaving tangible traces. In this context, the role of the Anunnaki takes on a new dimension. They were not merely guardians of moral order or overseers of kingship. They governed cycles of water, of grain, of time itself. The earliest texts refer to them in agricultural contexts more often than in mythic narrative. When a field was blessed, it was the Anunnaki who conferred the blessing. When a boundary was disputed, they were called upon as witnesses. When a harvest succeeded, it was attributed not to human effort, but to divine alignment. This persistent association suggests that, for the Sumerians, the Anunnaki were not remote beings, but forces embedded in the systems upon which life depended. Yet for all this integration, the origin of the system remains opaque. The archaeological layers show no progression of ideas, no experiments with differing pantheons, no shifts in cosmic understanding. Instead, the worldview appears suddenly, already intertwined with celestial motion, agricultural rhythm, and administrative order. Its absence in earlier layers feels less like a missing step and more like a missing world, one whose influence survived long enough to shape the birth of civilization, yet whose material traces have collapsed into silence. This silence beckons with an unspoken question. If the first farmers and builders inherited their understanding of cosmic order, what earlier landscape or catastrophe shaped the knowledge they carried? And how much of that forgotten world still lingers in the quiet expectation that the universe, like the fields of ancient Sumer, follows laws we must obey to survive? Far beyond the fields and canals that sustained the first cities, another thread of the Sumerian worldview begins to emerge, one woven through trade routes that stretched across mountains, deserts, and distant coasts. The earliest merchants of Mesopotamia did not travel casually. Their journeys were deliberate, anchored by expectations older than the cities they served. Boats carved from bundled reeds crossed Gulf waters, carrying bitumen, grain, and wool. Caravans wound through the passes of the Zagros, returning with obsidian, timber, and metals. Yet amid this movement, the Sumerians carried something else, an assumption that whoever ruled a distant land still operated under a cosmic framework not entirely unlike their own. The belief that authority flowed from an external source appears not only in internal administration, but in early diplomacy, as though the world itself were knit together by a hierarchy invisible yet universally binding. Evidence for this appears subtly in the earliest trade tablets. Some reference agreements witnessed not only by human representatives, but by deities whose oversight extended beyond city walls. Even exchanges conducted in remote outposts were inscribed with the same formulas invoking divine witness. This consistency suggests that the Sumerians perceived the universe as unified under a shared order, and that those who interacted across cultural boundaries did so within the same overarching system. Yet such a worldview seems disproportionately mature for societies just emerging from the village stage of development. If the concept of externalized authority arose internally, why did it manifest so seamlessly across domains, agriculture, governance, ritual, economy, without leaving behind layers of experimentation or diverse theological expressions? The question deepens when one considers the artifacts exchanged along trade routes. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, obsidian from Anatolia, copper from Oman, each traveled far to reach Mesopotamian cities. But while the goods moved freely, the religious motifs associated with them did not. No neighboring civilization appears to share the Sumerian concept of a divine administrative council. Egyptian gods embodied forces of nature, Their mythology evolved as dynasties rose and fell. The peoples of the Iranian plateau developed their own symbolic systems, none centered on judicial councils of cosmic authority. Even the cultures of Anatolia, though influenced later by Mesopotamian ideas, show no early signs of adopting Sumerian structures. The worldview of the Sumerians stands alone, its intricacies unexplained by diffusion or cultural borrowing. One might imagine that such an isolated system would fracture with time, yet the opposite occurs. Through the early dynastic period, despite political rivalries and intermittent warfare, the conceptual framework remains intact. Kings justify their actions through appeals to divine will. City-states negotiate boundaries by invoking cosmic oversight. Even when armies clashed across the plains, legal and ritual language stayed consistent, as though war itself unfolded within a regulated space. This rigidity suggests that the belief system was not simply a cultural preference, but a structural necessity, an anchor for societies facing perpetual instability. But if belief stabilized society, what stabilized the belief itself? Clues appear in the administrative practices embedded in long-distance exchange. Merchants traveling between cities carried seals engraved with orderly processions or ritual scenes, images that reinforced social roles and cosmic alignment. These seals functioned both as signatures and as portable affirmations of the worldview that structured their home cities. The people who carved them did not treat the symbols as decorative. They treated them as representations of a reality that extended beyond their personal experience. Even when dealing with foreign goods, they framed their transactions through their own cosmic logic. This suggests that the Sumerian worldview was not shaped by the world outside, but imposed upon it, as though the people believed themselves upholding an order that transcended geography. But what of the people on the other end of the trade routes? At certain distant sites, Tepe-Sialk in Iran, Aslantepe in Anatolia, archaeologists uncover evidence of early administrative practices, sealings, and ceremonial spaces that hint at organizational complexity. Yet none bear the distinct markers of Sumerian cosmology. Instead, they reflect independent developments shaped by local needs rather than inherited frameworks. The absence of shared theological structures reinforces the impression that the Sumerian system did not arise from regional exchange. Something else must account for its coherence, something rooted within Mesopotamia itself or carried into it from an older or entirely lost context. This becomes especially evident when considering the Sumerian understanding of time. Calendars tied to lunar cycles, festivals marking celestial transitions, rituals linked to planetary visibility, all reflect a worldview in which time itself is structured. But this structuring appears abruptly, with no clear evolutionary curve. The agricultural record indicates that planting and harvesting cycles were aligned with celestial rhythms long before detailed astronomical documents survive. The implicit knowledge embedded in these cycles hints at an observational tradition that predates writing, yet its origins remain elusive. Some researchers proposed that generations of observations simply left no trace. Others consider the possibility that the conceptual leap occurred before the emergence of settled agriculture. But neither explanation accounts for the sophistication seen in the earliest layers. As the first cities expanded, the worldview that shaped them spread inward rather than outward. It defined institutions, rituals, and record-keeping, but did not absorb external influences in equal measure. The Sumerians adapted goods, technologies, and materials from their neighbors, but not their cosmologies. Instead, their theology remained stable, as if protected by a core idea too foundational to alter. This stability invites a troubling possibility. Perhaps the concept of cosmic order preceded not only writing, but civilization itself. Perhaps an earlier phase of human experience, one not preserved in material culture, shaped this worldview long before it was written. Yet if such a phase existed, its traces have vanished. The archaeological layers remain silent. The myths preserve only fragments. And the administrative tablets, so meticulous in their detail, record a system without noting its birth. What survives is not explanation, but inheritance. An inheritance so deeply woven into the identity of the earliest cities that even as empires rose and fell around them, the underlying logic persisted. Across the ancient trade roads, where merchants carried goods through wind-swept plains and mountain passes, the Sumerian worldview traveled with them, not as doctrine, but as assumption. And if assumptions this profound survived the disarray of early civilization, then one must ask what earlier understanding shaped them, and why its imprint remains, while its origin has faded into irretrievable silence. The further one moves into the ritual heart of early Mesopotamian life, the more the lines between daily necessity and cosmic duty begin to blur. Inside the temples that dominated each city, towering structures of mud brick layered across centuries, every gesture, every offering, every measurement seems to echo an older rhythm, one so well established that even the earliest surviving texts capture it without hesitation. The rituals themselves are not described as innovations or revelations. They are presented as continuations of a practice assumed to have always existed. And yet for archaeologists studying the deep layers beneath these temples, the evidence of such continuity does not appear. The physical foundations evolve gradually, but the conceptual foundations emerge abruptly, without visible scaffolding. From this tension arises a mystery that no excavation has yet resolved. How did the earliest cities act with the certainty of ancient tradition when their material history suggests a world still in formation? Temple rituals offer some of the clearest examples of this paradox. At Nippur, long considered the spiritual center of Sumer, priests enacted ceremonies tied not to local concerns, but to a cosmology that asserted itself across all city-states. Inscriptions describe the Anunnaki convening in judgment, the renewal of divine decrees, and the reaffirmation of kingship, rituals that connected earthly governance with cosmic procedure. What is most striking is the lack of regional variation. Unlike Greece or Egypt, where neighboring cities often developed unique interpretations of shared myths, the Sumerian texts display remarkable uniformity. The rituals performed in Nippur resemble those in Uruk, and Lagash. Even in periods of political rivalry, their ceremonial logic remains consistent. This uniformity suggests a shared conceptual inheritance rather than centuries of theological negotiation. Yet the archaeological layers prior to writing reveal no such unified ideology. The architecture of the temples reinforces this sense of inherited structure. Excavations at Eridu uncover a series of temples built atop one another over 1,000 years, each layer expanding the previous design with striking regularity. While the visual form evolves, the spatial logic, central sanctuary, surrounding courtyards, ritual pathways, remains constant. It is as if the builders were following guidelines preserved across generations, though no text from the early period explains these guidelines. The continuity of design suggests that the idea of sacred space preceded the first bricks laid, as though temple builders worked from a conceptual blueprint older than any surviving foundation. Without transitional structures to mark the development of these ideas, scholars are left to question whether the conceptual blueprint emerged within Mesopotamia or was carried into it from an earlier, unrecorded epoch. The rituals performed within these spaces reveal similar patterns. Offerings are delivered in precise quantities, measured, logged, and justified according to divine expectations. Even the arrangement of sacrificial animals follows instructions copied with little alteration for centuries. The stability of these procedures contrasts with the dynamic political landscape outside the temples. City-states rose and fell, alliances shifted, fields salinized, and canals changed course, yet the rituals persisted. This steadfastness implies that ritual practice served not merely as religious expression, but as the backbone of a worldview that bound communities together. It also implies that the worldview itself was not new when first recorded. It arrived already hardened into form, like a law recognized rather than created. Yet perhaps the most telling ritual element lies in the timing. Almost every significant ceremony, coronations, annual renewals, agricultural festivals, was tied to celestial events. Lunar months determined offerings, planetary risings dictated processions, and symbolic reenactments occurred precisely when stars crossed the horizon. This precision indicates a long observational tradition. But without earlier astronomical records, scholars must rely on inference. Did generations of pre-literate observers pass down this knowledge orally? If so, why did no symbolic or material traces survive? Or did the association between celestial cycles and ritual action arise from a conceptual framework that predated settled life altogether? If the latter is true, then the rituals recorded in clay may preserve fragments of a worldview shaped before the first cities appeared on the floodplains. The myths provide further context for these rituals, though not in the way one might expect. Rather than illustrating origins, they often read like explanations for roles already established. The gods do not gain authority, they wield it. They do not discover order, they maintain it. Even the dramatic narratives, Inanna's descent, Enlil's decrees, Enki's instructions, function less as stories of cosmic beginnings than as reaffirmations of a stable hierarchy. The Anunnaki appear not as unpredictable beings whose actions drive creation, but as custodians of a pre-existing order. Their decisions mirror the judicial roles assigned to them in legal and administrative texts, reinforcing the idea that mythic and civic order were two expressions of the same underlying principle. If such principles were invented, one would expect to find traces of alternative models, competing myths, regional pantheons, early experiments in ritual structure. Yet none appear in the archaeological or textual record. Instead, the earliest texts display a level of standardization that typically arises only after centuries of theological evolution. But evolution leaves evidence, varied iconography, transitional symbols, experimental scripts. Sumer offers none of these. It is as though the worldview entered history entirely intact. Some scholars have suggested that catastrophic events may have erased earlier layers of Sumerian belief. Evidence of flooding, widespread abandonment, and abrupt shifts in settlement patterns support the possibility of lost traditions. However, catastrophe usually fragments cultural memory rather than unifying it. The consistency of Sumerian cosmology implies not fragmentation, but preservation. A preservation so effective that it overshadowed whatever preceded it. One is left to wonder whether the flood remembered in myth symbolizes a break so profound that it severed not only communities but the chain of memory itself, leaving only the framework that emerged afterward. Yet even if catastrophe played a role, it cannot alone explain the singular nature of the Sumerian worldview. Something more fundamental seems to underlie their rituals and myths, a conviction that the universe is structured, that authority descends, that duty extends beyond human will. These ideas permeate every aspect of their civilization, from temple design to agricultural management to political ideology. Their persistence suggests that the Sumerians saw themselves not as creators of order, but as participants within it, bound by laws older than the world they lived in. Still, the question remains: if this worldview was inherited, from where did it originate? And why did its deeper layers vanish so thoroughly that only its surface survives? A surface polished enough to shape the first cities, yet silent about the world that came before. As the Sumerian worldview radiated outward from the heart of Mesopotamia, it began leaving faint imprints on neighboring traditions, traces subtle enough to escape casual notice, yet consistent enough to suggest an inheritance of ideas rather than mere coincidence. Among the archives of Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, clay tablets describe assemblies of gods deliberating in councils strikingly similar to the Anunnaki. Yet the Hittites themselves adapted myths from many cultures, and their pantheon was a mosaic of borrowed deities. That they preserved the image of a divine council, not as an exotic foreign element, but as an expected cosmological structure, hints at the transmission of an older conceptual architecture, one that predated their rise. But if this architecture flowed outward from Sumer, why does it appear in distant lands without the accompanying development of Sumer's earliest theological layers? The echoes persist, yet the origin remains hidden. The archives of Uruk strengthen this enigma. Written in an alphabetic cuneiform distinct from Sumerian writing, the Ugaritic texts describe the high god El presiding over a council of divine beings, the sons of El, who debate matters of cosmic consequence. The resemblance to Sumerian motifs is unmistakable. But unlike Sumer, Ugarit preserves traditions in which such councils evolved gradually, shaped by local politics and changing ritual needs. What the Ugaritic stories lack is the Sumerian sense of primordial order, the conviction that cosmic governance existed before creation. Their divine assemblies feel dynamic, subject to negotiation, their gods embroiled in rivalries absent from early Mesopotamian texts. This difference suggests that while the idea of divine governance spread widely, the conceptual gravity of the Sumerian version did not. Something in Mesopotamia held the idea in place with a force not found elsewhere. Further west, early Hebrew writings contain traces even more surprising. The Book of Job describes a gathering of divine beings standing before Yahweh, a scene so reminiscent of Sumerian assemblies that scholars long debated its polytheistic implications. Psalm 82 preserves a moment even more striking: a god presiding over a council of gods, delivering judgment upon them. Later religious redactors softened or obscured these archaic elements, but their survival beneath layers of monotheistic theology suggests a lineage of ideas older than the texts that carry them. Yet Hebrew tradition ultimately transforms the concept, placing moral authority in a single deity rather than a deliberative council. What persists is not the structure of cosmic governance, but the conviction that law precedes rulers, that moral truth flows from beyond human will, an echo, faint but intact, of the Sumerian belief in descending authority. But the path of transmission is not linear. These echoes appear in cultures with little direct contact in their formative periods. The Greeks, through later influence from the Near East, adopted the motif of gods convening atop Mount Olympus, though their deities remained driven by rivalry and passion, far from the solemn deliberation of the Anunnaki. Roman law preserved the idea of an external moral order, jus naturale, natural law, yet framed it as philosophical discovery rather than divine decree. Even early Islamic jurisprudence would later inherit the notion that justice aligns with a divinely established structure, though stripped of cosmic councils altogether. The pattern is clear. The logic persists while the symbols change. The architecture survives while its original vocabulary dissolves. How did a concept so distinct, so deeply tied to the material conditions of early Mesopotamian life, spread so widely while leaving its early developmental layers invisible? Cultural diffusion alone cannot explain it. The Sumerian worldview is too self-contained, too polished, too consistent across city-states to be the product of gradual negotiation. And yet, outside Mesopotamia, the concept becomes malleable, adapting to local traditions, losing the rigid administrative character that defines its earliest expression. This suggests that what moved across regions was not the full Sumerian system, but its underlying principle, that authority originates from a realm distinct from human endeavor, and that legitimacy depends on alignment with that realm. The material record provides few anchors for this transmission. Cylinder seals found as far west as Anatolia depict scenes of order and procession reminiscent of Mesopotamian imagery. But they lack the theological nuance of their Sumerian counterparts. Portable objects, amulets, beads, inscribed tablets carry symbols but not full narratives. Trade routes brought goods, but not fully formed myths. If ideas traveled with merchants or scribes, why is their movement so difficult to chart? Why do only fragments of the Sumerian worldview appear abroad, shorn of the precision and stability that define its origin? Some scholars speculate that the conceptual framework spread indirectly through political and administrative techniques rather than religious doctrine. As empires borrowed accounting systems, legal formulas, and diplomatic conventions from Mesopotamia, they may have internalized the logic underlying those practices without adopting the gods themselves. Over time, the cosmic councils became metaphor, then memory, then abstraction. But this explanation still leaves unanswered how the Sumerians themselves came to hold such a structured worldview so early. More provocative theories hint at deeper cultural memory, experiences shared by early human populations long before writing, preserved through ritual gestures, oral formulas, or symbolic practices that survived environmental upheaval. If such a memory existed, its content has dissolved into the archaeological silence that precedes the first cities. And yet its resonance persists in the Sumerian record with such clarity that one struggles to frame it as mere invention. The idea of a universe governed by deliberation rather than chaos, of authority descending rather than rising, of order preceding creation. These are not intuitive concepts for societies transitioning from village life to urban complexity. They feel inherited. But inherited from what? A forgotten social formation destroyed by climate catastrophe? A long-extinct cultural horizon whose material record lies beneath riverbeds and marshes? Or perhaps a collective memory shaped by experiences older than cities, older even than agriculture, experiences that left no artifacts but shaped the cognitive frameworks of early societies. The echoes that survive, Hittite councils, Ugaritic assemblies, Hebrew divine meetings, are fragments of a larger pattern, one whose center lies in the Sumerian worldview. And if these echoes once belonged to a unified conceptual tradition that splintered across migrations and millennia, then the surviving pieces may reflect only the faintest outline of the original structure. The question that rises from these dispersed traces is not why other civilizations borrowed from Sumer, but why Sumer preserved a framework of order so complete that later cultures could only reinterpret fragments of it. And if Sumer did not invent this framework, then somewhere in humanity's deeper past lies the source, hidden, erased, or transformed beyond recognition, yet influential enough to shape the birth of civilization. As Mesopotamian civilization matured and later empires rose upon its foundations, a quiet transformation began to unfold, not in the visible structures of power, but in the invisible assumptions that governed how power was understood. By the time the Babylonian and Assyrian states consolidated their authority, the original clarity of the Anunnaki's role had already begun to blur. Their names still appeared in hymns, their judgments echoed in rituals, but their presence drifted from the center of political life toward the margins of memory. Yet even as the gods themselves receded, the architecture of thought they embodied remained firmly in place. Kings no longer invoked the Anunnaki explicitly, but they continued to claim legitimacy through forces older and higher than themselves. Law codes framed justice as revelation rather than invention. Even imperial propaganda, etched in stone across vast territories, proclaimed rulers as restorers of order rather than creators of it. The framework endured, even as its original vocabulary fell away. Consider the Code of Hammurabi, compiled around 1750 BCE. Its prologue declares that Hammurabi was chosen by the gods to bring about justice in the land, not to construct it. The code's authority derives from its divine origin, yet the Anunnaki, once the ultimate arbiters of such authority, are conspicuously absent. Their functions have been absorbed into a streamlined hierarchy headed by Marduk and Shamash. But the logic remains unmistakably Sumerian. Law precedes the king, legitimacy descends. Even when invoked through different names, the underlying pattern persists. This persistence signals a shift in cultural memory, one in which the structure of belief remains intact even as the original agents of that structure fade from cultural consciousness. Similar patterns appear in administrative systems across later Mesopotamian empires. Assyrian kings boasted of conquests, yet their inscriptions frame victory as the fulfillment of divine will, not the result of military strategy alone. Babylonian scribes recorded astronomical phenomena with increasing precision, but the idea that celestial movement reflected cosmic authority persisted beneath their calculations. The worldview became more abstract, more philosophical, but never truly severed from its Sumerian roots. The Anunnaki had once presided over cosmic councils. Now their functions were embedded in principles of cosmic order, principles that no longer needed names to survive. This transition reveals something significant about the durability of inherited ideas. When a symbol persists long enough, its origin becomes secondary to its function. The names of the Anunnaki faded because their logic no longer required them. The system had taken on a life of its own. It shaped legal codes, political ideology, ritual calendars. It structured decision-making in palaces and temples alike. It even framed catastrophe, droughts, invasions, crop failures, not as random events, but as consequences of moral imbalance. Kings could lose legitimacy because they had violated order, a notion that survived even as the theological scaffolding that once justified it began to crumble. Yet the very success of this inherited framework introduced a new paradox. As later cultures absorbed its principles, they often detached them from their Sumerian origins, reinterpreting them through local myths and political conditions. The cosmic councils became divine assemblies in Hittite, Ugaritic, and Hebrew traditions. The principle of descending authority became natural law in Roman jurisprudence, divine mandate in medieval Europe, and constitutional legitimacy in modern democracies. Each iteration retained the logic while shedding the imagery. The world continued to think in Sumerian structures without recognizing their source. Meanwhile, the archaeological record from the late 2nd millennium BCE shows increasing fragmentation. Temples were rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt again. City-states collapsed under pressure from invasions and internal strife. Yet through these ruptures, the conceptual order endured. The collapse of Sumer did not erase its worldview. It amplified it, dispersing its foundations across cultures that would carry fragments into their own developmental trajectories. Ironically, the dissolution of the material civilization seemed to strengthen the transmission of its intangible structures. But as this transmission continued, the memory of the framework's origin grew more diffuse. By the time cuneiform literacy waned and the last Mesopotamian temples fell silent, the Anunnaki had become ghosts in their own mythology, acknowledged but no longer invoked, remembered but not worshipped. Their absence raises an unsettling question. How does a system outlive the symbols that created it? And what does it mean when societies inherit structures they no longer fully understand? The fade-in of the Anunnaki from active theology marks not the end of their influence, but a transformation from explicit belief to implicit assumption. The cosmos was still structured. Law still preceded rulers. Authority still required justification. The council still existed, though its members no longer had names. The framework had become a kind of intellectual instinct, so deeply rooted that future civilizations mistook it for universal human intuition rather than the specific heirloom of a vanished world. Yet this very universality obscures the origin of the ideas themselves. Later cultures would debate philosophy, craft law codes, and theorize cosmic order without realizing that they were re-articulating a legacy inherited from the earliest cities. The real mystery, then, is not how the Sumerians shaped their world, but how their world continued shaping ours long after the memory of their gods dissolved into clay. And as the last echoes of the Anunnaki faded into the margins of later texts, one question remained suspended in the silence. If the earliest framework of authority could survive without its divine names, then where else, still hidden beneath the surface of modern thought, might the forgotten foundations of an even older worldview be waiting? By the time writing had become a memory, and the last cuneiform tablets lay buried under drifting sand, the framework the Sumerians left behind was no longer recognized as theirs. It had dissolved into the assumptions of later civilizations, resurfacing in ideas so familiar that few ever questioned their origin. The belief that justice stands above rulers, the conviction that moral consequence exists even without witnesses, the expectation that authority must be justified by something beyond strength. These notions traveled across continents and centuries, shedding the names of the gods who once upheld them. But as the framework spread, it also thinned. The cosmic councils became metaphors. The Anunnaki became faint references in scholarly footnotes. The rituals that once aligned human labor with celestial cycles faded beneath layers of new religious and philosophical systems. What endured was the shape of the ideas, not the memory of their source. Roman jurists later argued that law expresses a universal order discoverable through reason. Medieval monarchs claimed divine right not as revelation, but as inherited mandate. Enlightenment philosophers debated the existence of natural rights, believing them to be self-evident truths rather than echoes of beliefs shaped thousands of years earlier in a land where writing itself began. Even in modern systems of governance, the assumption that leaders are custodians of a higher framework remains central. Constitutions, legal codes, and international charters all treat authority as delegated, not self-generated. Power flows downward from an external principle, once divine, now abstract. In this shift lies the ultimate transformation of the Sumerian worldview. Its logic persists even when its cosmology vanishes. Its structure remains even when the beings who embodied it fade into silence. Yet the disappearance of the Anunnaki from active memory presents its own enigma. If their roles were once so essential, how did their names erode while their functions endured? One explanation lies in the nature of cultural transmission. When societies borrow ideas, they often discard the symbols and retain the utility. The Sumerian framework of descending authority and cosmic order proved effective, adaptable, and stabilizing. Its usefulness allowed it to survive the collapse of kingdoms, the fall of empires, the transitions of language. But usefulness does not preserve origins. Over time, the divine councils that once governed the cosmos became philosophical principles, then legal doctrines, then common expectations so deeply rooted in human thought that they no longer appeared to have a cultural source at all. This process of abstraction, however, leaves behind faint markers, moments where the underlying structure breaks through the surface of later traditions. The Hebrew scriptures' shadowy references to divine assemblies, the Hittite and Ugaritic texts preserving councils of gods, the Greek idea of order maintained by moirai rather than kings, all hint at an older, shared conceptual layer. But none possess the coherence or gravity of the Sumerian version. They are fragments, imitations, or reinterpretations of something much more complete. The further from Sumer the ideas traveled, the more they shifted, suggesting that the original framework possessed a clarity not easily replicated. This clarity raises a question that scholars rarely articulate openly. Why was the Sumerian worldview so complete at its earliest appearance, when neighboring cultures struggled for centuries to define their cosmic structures? The answer may lie in what the archaeological record does not show. No transitional myths, no fragmented pantheons, no experimental rituals. The Sumerian worldview does not unfold. It arrives. And its arrival coincides with the earliest stages of urbanization, as though the birth of the city and the articulation of cosmic order were intertwined. But the absence of developmental layers leaves open the unsettling possibility that the worldview did not originate with the first cities. Perhaps it preceded them, carried through oral traditions or inherited from an older cultural horizon. Perhaps the survivors of ancient catastrophes, floods, droughts, migrations, brought fragments of an earlier conceptual system into the river plains of Mesopotamia, fragments that solidified once writing provided a means to fix them in place. If so, the Sumerian worldview may represent not the beginning of human intellectual history, but the last visible remnant of something deeper, older, and now lost beyond recovery. As centuries passed, the original names faded, but the structure they once upheld remained so deeply woven into human society that it became almost indistinguishable from instinct. Generations forgot the Anunnaki, yet continued to think in the patterns the Anunnaki once embodied. They built courts, councils, codes, and hierarchies that mirrored the invisible architecture inscribed on the earliest tablets. They expected the universe to obey laws, and expected themselves to obey laws in turn. They believed that order existed prior to their decisions, and that legitimacy must be granted from beyond personal will. These beliefs are still with us, not as theology, but as foundation, and yet, within this continuity lies an unanswered question that lingers like a shadow cast across the history of thought. If the earliest known civilization preserved a framework so coherent and enduring, one that continues to shape how societies justify power and morality today, then what shaped them? What force, what memory, what inheritance guided the hands that carved wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, encoding not just their world, but the structure of worlds yet to come? The silence that follows this question is not empty. It is full of the possibilities that archaeology has not yet uncovered, full of the worlds that may have existed before history began to write itself, full of the ideas that humanity still carries without knowing their origin. And within that silence lies perhaps the most haunting mystery of all, whether the deepest foundations of our beliefs are echoes of something forgotten, waiting for time or chance to reveal what preceded the first dawn of recorded thought. As the last threads of this long journey settle into place, a quiet realization lingers, one that does not close the mystery, but deepens it. We began among broken tablets and buried cities, following traces of a worldview that arrived in history already complete, already certain, already aware of an order older than itself. And as we walked through the ruins of Uruk, the temples of Eridu, the hymns of Nippur, and the echoes carried across Hittite, Ugaritic, and early Hebrew texts, the pattern remained unmistakable. The names faded, the symbols shifted, but the structure endured. Perhaps this is the most enduring legacy of the Sumerians, not the bricks of their cities or the myths of their gods, but the invisible framework they carved into the human mind. A belief that authority descends, that justice precedes judgment, that order is not created but discovered. These ideas have outlived empires, languages, and landscapes. They govern our courts, shape our institutions, and guide our sense of right and wrong, even when we no longer remember where they came from. Yet the silence beneath these ideas still calls to us. The missing developmental layers, the vanished traditions, the memories carried into the floodplains by hands we can no longer trace. Whether the Sumerians inherited their worldview from forgotten ancestors, from shattered worlds erased by water and time, or from a deeper human instinct shaped long before writing, we cannot yet say. But their legacy remains woven into the way we ask questions about power, about meaning, about our place in a universe we still hope is governed by something more than chance. Thank you for wandering through these ancient shadows with us, for breathing with the clay dust of forgotten centuries, and for letting the echoes of a distant world lull your thoughts toward quiet reflection. If these mysteries stirred something in you, curiosity, wonder, or the soft ache of an unanswered question, then you are exactly where you need to be. This is the Cryptic Realm channel, where the past never sleeps, and neither do the questions it leaves behind. Until the next journey, may your night be gentle, and your thoughts wander just far enough to remind you that history's deepest truths often whisper from places we have yet to uncover.